Hi there, my name is Gary Lee and welcome to Racing Against Time, a series of presentation shorts that looks at the wristwatch revolution that took place over a quarter century, starting in 1957 and ending in 1982. Now at this point you might ask, why bother? Surely today wristwatches are finished. Everyone has the time on their phones, on their laptops, on their tablets and on their desktops, right? Well, some people still wear them, including their modern descendants, the so-called wearables like the Apple Watch. Because of this, plus all the related stuff like atomic clocks, GPS, network time protocol, we will look at present-day timekeeping right at the end of the series. But as with any good story, I would say we should start at the beginning and look at wristwatches for three reasons. First, there's a history of technology angle. As we'll see over the course of the series, wristwatch development was part of a much larger move to more accurate timekeeping that a modernising world needed. Starting with the work of John Harrison in the late 1700s to allow safer navigation of ships by solving the longitude problem, best available accuracy timepieces, later known as chronometers, helped the railroads to run, astronomers to observe the universe, and eventually astronauts to go into space. But like the rockets the astronauts rode on, chronometers were a dual-use technology. As instruments of war, they were used in tasks ranging from synchronizing attacks by ground troops to timing bomb release on board aircraft. On a happier note, a second reason for being interested in wristwatches is collecting. And here, there's not only the sheer fun of retro tech, but also, from time to time, the chance of finding some real treasure in the trash. Perhaps the best example of this was a newbie British collector who, only a few years ago, thought he'd spotted something special about a Seiko watch he saw online. After buying the watch for not very much money, he did his homework and confirmed that it was made as a presentation gift for the Emperor Hirohito's tour of Europe in 1971. If that watch ever came onto the open market today, at present-day prices, it would be worth upwards of $95,000. Now, as a collector, I'm not in that league, but I have found some watches that even after repair are worth roughly 2 to 3 times what I paid for them. For me though, it's not really about the money. I grew up at a time when watches were still a vital everyday tool, and this is why one of my favourite timepieces is actually a battered old pocket watch. It's around 50 years old, it's an Ingersoll Triumph, and it was what my granddad ran our family farm on. It was never a great timekeeper, and it barely works now, but it's an heirloom, a sentimental treasure beyond any price. The third reason for being interested in wristwatches applies to this small form factor specifically. Although clocks and other types of watches are interesting, for me the real fascination with wristwatches lies in a pivotal engineering problem. How do you pack a reliable, accurate and precise timepiece into a case small enough to fit on the human wrist? This problem of micro-miniaturization is something we will encounter time and again. But as an example, consider that whilst the first electric clock was built as early as the 1840s, it took until 1957 for the first electric wristwatch to reach the market. So where do we go to from here? Covering the period 1957 to 1982 inclusive, we will be focusing on the race to innovate and the drive to market new types of wristwatches from the point of view of 6 companies right at the cutting edge of the revolution. The 6 companies I've chosen are, for the US, Hamilton and Bulova; for Switzerland, Omega and Girard-Perregaux; and for Japan, Citizen and Seiko. In their own various ways, as we'll see, each company contributed hugely to the developments that took place over the period, but, as we'll also see, some did much better than others in the result. But before starting on all that, one small thing, one big thing. The small thing is a brief history of wristwatches prior to 57, which will round out today's presentation short, while the big thing is letting you know about part 2, a follow-up video which will explain about the basics of timekeeping, including some jargon busting. Although timepieces wearable on arms, wrists or even fingers can be traced back to the 1570s, Their timekeeping was so poor they were little more than mechanical novelties. The first device accurate enough to be worth calling a wristwatch was produced between the years 1810-1812 by Abraham Louis Breguet. This was done on a special commission from the sister of Napoleon, Caroline Murat, who became Queen of Naples. However, with the typical sexism of the time, that origin story promptly relegated the wristwatch to being a woman's item. Men, in contrast, had their pocket watches. It took the First World War to change these attitudes, with the need for small, accurate timepieces that could be secured firmly to a user in the trenches at sea or in the air. Manufacturers developed a whole raft of wristwatch models for officers and pilots. After the First World War, male fashion accordingly moved away from the pocket watch and towards the wristwatch, a trend accelerated across World War II and largely complete by the 1960s. However, until 1957, one thing united all wristwatches, indeed all watches available to the public. They were mechanical, the same basic approach used since the very start of watchmaking. In 1957, however, all that changed with the unveiling of the Hamilton electric watch, a device nearly 10 years in the making, including co-development of a power source, among the first of the button-type batteries. So in part 3, we'll start the series properly with a look at the life and times of the Hamilton Watch Company. But before that, just a reminder that in part 2, we'll look at the basics of timekeeping and do some jargon busting. So until next time then, goodbye.